Hello, it's Elle.
Hey.
Welcome back to another episode of Gender in Focus. Today we are talking about a really common worry that a lot of allies have, which is, am I a bad person if I don't speak up every single time? Allyship can often be spoken about in very black and white ways. Like real life situations are usually a lot messier than that. And so we're getting into the importance of speaking up, why people struggle with this so much, and how to think about those moments with a little bit more nuance. And as always, I'm joined by Kai. Hello.
Hello, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine, thank you. A little bit annoyed about the weather today. Not to be British about this, take it immediately to the weather, but like it can't make up its mind today, and I don't know what I'm doing.
Curtains up or down, or window open or closed. Yeah.
But anyway, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing well. Yeah. It's
Great.
I mean, also variable here, but mostly sunny, so I'm thankful for that.
Fair enough. Okay, this is a question that people bring up quite a lot of the time. This is something that I've heard quite a lot with people who are struggling. Maybe they're not as confident in the topic, especially. And so what I wanted to ask you first is, where is that phrase, like, am I a bad person if I don't speak up? Where is that usually showing up, and who's saying it?
Yeah, you're right. It is very common. And the places where I see it the most often, like you were alluding to, is folks who are just starting on their inclusion journey related to gender diversity. They're very hesitant, and also they're trying to understand where their place is within action or stepping back, or so they're just kind of dancing all over the place, trying to fit in, or try to find their place. And I can totally understand that. I have similar tendencies when it comes to other equity groups, right? That
Absolutely.
I'm
Yeah.
trying to support. And so certainly not alone in that approach. And also there's a little bit more to it than that. And there's, few different pieces to this type of statement. And even though it might be very genuine and sincere, it's good to take a closer look at it.
Where do you think that fear kind of comes from? Obviously, you talked about how it's generally people who are a bit earlier on in their allyship journey, but yeah, that fear of, like, the phrase "am I a bad person" is so interesting to me, and I'm curious about where you think that comes from with regards to not speaking up every time you hear something that maybe you should.
Yeah. So you're right that kind of looking at the sentence itself, if you break it down into its component parts, it's the first part is, am I a bad person? And it's really quite heavy of a thing to say about oneself. And also maybe that's a bid for reassurance, or to make sure that one understands, especially if it's not sure or certain and it's relatively new. And then the other part is, if I don't speak up. So what is it that makes somebody a bad person in that person's mind? Is the not speaking up. And I would say even a little extra is the every time piece, right? So there's a bit of a kind of black and white nature to it, in the sense that, like, it's anytime you have always, everywhere, everyone, those types of statements,
Right.
a little alarm bell goes off, in a sense, because it's really quite nuanced in terms of it won't be every time, right? And so already starting to unpack some of the assumptions that are baked into this of, I must speak up every time. There's a kind of
Right.
a pressure or a compulsion that that person puts on themselves. And then if that's not done, ergo, automatic assumption or conclusion is bad, right? And not just bad, but bad person. So it has to do something with their personhood,
Like
which,
fundamentally,
yeah, it's so heavy. And it can be a lot for both sides of that equation.
I think where I want to go. My brain just shot off in 5 angles then.
Okay.
So I think maybe where I should go next is more sort of the reasons that people hesitate, like they do hesitate to speak up when
Sure.
something uncomfortable happens, or even like outright transphobic, like through the whole spectrum of things where maybe you should speak up.
Right.
What would you say common reasons are that people don't actually speak up?
Yeah. So this is where folks, there's a bit of inner monologue that happens. And like I said, I can do this on other topics. One of the common things that we hear is, I don't know enough information to talk about this topic in a competent sort of way. And the idea being that I might misspeak in a way that could harm, right? Other people think it's not my place. This is for somebody else to address. In particular, people think only trans people should speak to this, right? Whether it's the person who is experiencing the challenge and or a trans person who has likely experienced that in the past. So only they have the authority to speak on the matter. Others should kind of sit down and be quiet. There's the fear of getting it wrong. That's a very common
Right. Yeah.
point of hesitation, right? Like, what if I mess this up? Especially if I don't know everything, I might get it wrong. I'll have people who are upset at me and maybe even might yell at me, right? So there's these kind of vignettes that happen in one's mind of like being yelled at and, cursed
Right.
out or whatnot, right?
Yeah.
Others are, they don't want to deal with hot topics because they're afraid of conflict with other people who
Right.
might disagree or be hostile towards trans and non-binary folks. So it's just like, oof, that's too hot to handle. I'm going to step away from this. And I think that's a pretty big one right now because a lot of topics related to trans and non-binary folks, through no fault of our own, are in like really deep, really hot waters. And
Right.
most people just don't want to go there. And others misunderstand, or they kind of see this more of a difference of opinion and maybe even see validity to both sides and don't recognize the disproportionate harm to trans and non-binary folks. And so can kind of take this both sidism thing where then they're like, it's not for me to say or resolve this between these two parties.
Right. Okay. As someone who is not very, I'm not very confrontational in the aggressive way, but if I were to be in a situation where I should speak up, I don't go about it in the way that I imagine that a lot of people imagine you should. And so that's kind of the direction I want to go. I don't know what my question is, but it's something around how the way people imagine speaking up and what the reality of that actually is. And is it always like, I'm going to start a fight now? Because if so, I've never spoken up in my life. Or is there maybe something else that you can do as a way to direct the conversation?
Yeah, I think you're right that there's something related to somebody's perception about what they think should happen or what they think likely is going to happen, especially with what we've seen in the media or even online discourse is like bananas about trans issues. And then sometimes people just copy and paste that discussion to real everyday in-person life.
Right.
When actually the kind of pushbacks that happen are far more gentle, far more considerate of the other person, and trying to help them with a learning journey, and are not so confrontational as we might see online. It's just I mean, in my reality, I'm sure there's many different ways, and not to say that it never happens. Certainly there can be kind of knockout, drag out confrontation.
Kai's been starting fights.
Pretty much. So I think more likely is it's a quieter discussion that is actually quite manageable and is really important, and where both contribute to the discussion, and where somebody who, like, people listening to this podcast have a little bit more information that they can say, I don't know everything, but here's some of what I've been learning, and I found this really interesting, and I didn't know this, or I thought this and now I think that. So it's way more personable and
Right.
actually really transformational between everybody involved. So it's just kind of challenging those perceptions that we have that it's going to be this awful thing.
Yeah, I don't know about your experiences. I mean, I do a bit because you've told me, but
Mhm.
I think that, like, at least for me, there have been moments where I've been
Sure.
a bit much, especially when I was younger,
Mm.
and they're never as effective. Speaking
No.
up in that way, to me at least, things are always a little bit more helpful and create more space for discourse if you're sort of coming from the perspective of trying to see what the fear is for that other
Hmm.
person, or what the root is, and then directing it back to maybe reality a little bit
Hmm.
more. And I think I'm kind of curious about, like, the ways that you would go about that. Just thinking about somebody who is feeling like hesitant to speak up. Obviously,
Mm.
they're potentially thinking that they have to perform in a certain way, and there's, like, not really a way to do that.
Mm.
Um, I was wondering your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So the people that are hesitant, a few tips I would consider is coming from a place of curiosity, um, and not putting so much pressure to know everything, because no person can, right? Like, even
Right.
a deeply knowledgeable trans person doesn't know everything. And so if we approach things from curiosity, but also humility,
Mhm.
that can often make it that much easier. And it doesn't actually lead to, not in every instance, leads to confrontation. Other tips is to understand, like you were mentioning just now, like seeing where that person's coming from, not so much
Mhm.
for them to like go on about their thoughts a lot, but more just like, hey, what's driving that? Where like are, without saying what are you afraid of, because most people
Yeah.
can become a bit defensive, but just like there's something underneath what they're talking about. If we're saying example, trans women in women's sport, it's about fairness, and then getting them, without us going into that debate specifically, because there's a lot to it, and those might be actually pretty deep waters to wade into at first, but it's getting people to explain, what they mean by things, and why they think things in those ways, and also, do you know about X, right? I didn't know
Mhm.
about X. Like, you can own your own journey around
Mhm.
understanding, and that includes the parts where you didn't have understanding. That's actually really powerful, because it
Mhm.
connects the dots for folks to realize, oh, I skipped that step and I didn't actually know that was the case, right? And so you
Mhm.
can just be with people rather than, like, you know, you're not doing a TEDx talk with them
Right.
where you're
Right.
like monologue for 15 minutes. So, yeah.
Mhm. That's fair. Are there times where staying silent or, like, not speaking up is better
Mm.
than not?
Hmm. It's a really good question. And I do think there are instances in which it makes sense to be quiet. Obviously, safety is the number one reason. If
Right.
somebody is in a very agitated state, maybe it's not the time to go really deep into trans women and women's
What are you
sport,
so scared of? Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
So, that's physical safety, emotional safety, all of the things. So
Yeah, of
I'm
course.
not suggesting people disregard their own safety in these discussions. And if somebody comes forward with saying things that are not actually the case, it's seeing kind of where they're at with that. Is that more of a hesitant, like, I think this, but I'm not sure? In which
Mm.
case, there's a little bit more openness to, other things that to add into the discussion. But if they're like really definitive and they're locked in to that position, I generally find, and you've tried a few different ways and it's just not going anywhere, then, there's probably not as much utility. And it's not to say for all time, it's just for that particular moment. Maybe they're in a particular headspace, or, they got bad news, or who knows, right? What is driving that? And you might try another time, but I would kind of be responsive to what's coming up in the moment rather than trying to be like, okay, I've got to land this plane today.
Yeah, fair enough. I kind of want to go off of that to look at sort of briefly about power dynamics in that kind of way, because there are differences in the way that you speak up if you are talking to your mate versus talking to your boss. So I was wondering what your thoughts were on that too.
Oh yeah, that's a really important consideration on any topic, but this one in particular, where if you're talking to somebody you know really well and you are kind of at the same level, then it's a much easier approach where you can be a bit more casual. And especially with outside of the workplace, you could probably say things that, you know, depending on your dynamic or how you usually talk to one another, you can maybe tease them a bit or push back a little bit more strongly and be like, what are you talking about? Versus somebody you don't know that well, that you don't have an established rapport dynamic, then it's more about kind of a little bit more formal, a little bit more thoughtful, so that there's not kind of a repelling that sometimes happens with these things. So that's at the same level. But of course, if you're talking to your boss about these issues, and perhaps this boss is maybe a little bit or a lot off, and it's to say, we've encountered a lot of management and leadership that are ill-informed on these topics and doing harmful things, right? So leadership is not exempt from challenging things for trans folks.
Right.
So that's important to keep in mind. And if that's the case where you're kind of having to speak truth to power, of course, everybody has their approach that works for them. But some of the suggestions that I'll provide that have worked well for us is to set aside private time. So we're not doing this in a group setting of like telling them they're off base. That usually doesn't land well. Private conversation to say, hey, I've noticed these things, right? Whether it's in their behavior or some system thing or whatnot, and to say, this is my understanding of what that could be like for a trans person, or if you know the actual harm and the trans person okayed it for you to share that, either broadly or more specifically, then you can provide that impact. Sometimes leaders don't realize what kind of impact they have, and just that explanation can really unlock things. I also would come equipped with information. This happened 5 times in the last week, right?
Right.
Either that you noticed directly or, from others. And like to kind of create a bit of weight with which to address this with. Now, I understand if some people are hesitant because they're worried about their job, right? They don't want to lose their job. They maybe are in a probationary period, and so they don't want to rock the boat. In which case, if you're worried about those with a boss, maybe finding another person who can raise that might be another avenue. So just a few things to think about with power dynamics, but those are just a few.
Can I tell you one that someone did with me once?
Oh,
not with a boss, with a friend. It was back in the day before I'd learned anything about trans people. I made like a I can't remember what I said, but I said something stupid about it.
Okay.
And my friend was like, "Sit down, you dum dum," and like sat me down and was like,
"That's amazing."
I found it so funny, and I was like, because we had that rapport, it immediately I was like, "Oh right, that doesn't make any sense." Like I think it was something about trans women in sports,
Okay.
and then Yeah, she's like, sit down, you dum dum.
Oh, that is so cute.
And I love that so much. That's
Yeah,
my memory of being 19 and not
right.
knowing anything.
Mm.
But
What
I
a
think
what a great
it's,
friend though to
I
step in that
know,
way. I mean,
love.
obviously you had that rapport for you to know
Yeah.
that they weren't actually calling you dumb, but more just like, hey, we've had a moment here and now we're gonna unpack it
Yeah,
together. Aw. There's
it's
like
funny.
a form of endearment in that, you know?
Hmm.
Yeah.
It makes me laugh when I think about it still now. So funny. But yeah, there are ways of like connecting with people on a
Yeah.
way that will get them, because that's always the way to like get me in, is to make me
Yeah. Yeah.
laugh. So that's like, I think it's important to meet people where they are, right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
um yeah, I think that's cool.
Mhm.
I want to come back to something you said because I sort of brushed past it, which was about
Mm.
seeking approval or like
Ah. Oh.
validation from trans people that you're not bad.
Mm. Mm.
And that, I want to talk about the pressure that that creates for trans people who are dealing with the thing that you
Right.
didn't speak up against, and then you're
Right.
now seeking that
Mm.
validation from trans people too.
Right. Right. So in this kind of instance, if somebody who, didn't speak up and then asked the question, am I a horrible person, to the trans person who experienced it, right? Like in that moment, I understand what they're after, right? They're like,
Yeah.
shoot, I didn't do the thing that
Mm.
I wanted to do or that I thought I ought to do. And, it's because of all these reasons or whatnot. And now I'm going to this trans person and kind of asking for forgiveness, question mark,
Mm-hmm.
like there's
Mm-hmm.
that dynamic to it. And because of the way it's phrased, am I like a horrible person or a bad person? Like those are the very common things. It's just really difficult for the trans person. They might reassure that person who asked, but it just takes an extra amount of emotional labor to not
Mm-hmm.
only experience the challenge, but then also reassure somebody that they're not a horrible person, which also like how can that I've actually been asked that question before. So this is actually a very real thing. And I was just like, I'm sure they're a great person, but I'm not the one to determine that. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
even if I
Yeah.
said you're a good person, like, but
Mm.
I don't know. It felt really, really awkward. And at that point, I didn't actually want to kind of hold their hand with that. I was
Mm-hmm.
already dealing with so much. And in terms of how I'm not going to navigate a very difficult situation. And then I had
Mm-hmm.
something on top of that. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I also want to kind of, I think people deserve to process that. But maybe the
Mm.
trans person isn't the person that you do it with, right? Maybe
Right.
there's a
Mm-hmm.
friend that you can be like, this thing happened and I felt crappy.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like I let that trans person down. And here's why I hesitated. Like, do the processing, but just not
Mm-hmm.
with a trans person. And for me, there's a difference between behavior and who a person is. And in this case, it's a behavior based issue of not speaking up versus it has very little to do with the person, like being
Yeah.
bad or good. Yeah.
I kind of wanted to talk about that separation because there is a difference between I chose not to say something in this moment and I am a bad person that never speaks up. Like there's a
Mm,
difference between those two things. And I kind of wanted to unpack that a little bit more.
yeah. I mean, there's the occasional deciding not to um, step in and address the matter,
Mm-hmm.
related to trans issues. And then there's never doing anything. And I think sometimes people can be like, oh, I'm giving myself a break in this regard. And it can then kind of spiral into a justification of why they're never going to step in, right? Like just because we're saying, um, don't be so hard on yourself doesn't mean that we're saying never to show up, right? So I
Right.
think people
Yeah.
can flip from always to never very quickly rather than
Mm-hmm.
really what we're trying to get at is like this middle ground of like
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you do and sometimes you don't step
Mm-hmm.
in. And when you don't, there could be power dynamics at play. in some cases you're stepping aside so a trans person can actually, because they want to address the matter themselves rather than having
Mm-hmm.
others kind of maybe not quite land the plane.
Mm-hmm.
So that's okay when those instances happen. But then there are definitely instances where it does make sense to respond. These come up especially when there's not a trans person that you know of that is present to be able to respond.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and especially when there's like, jokes or even problematic things said interpersonally or between two people, those are good opportunities to step in, especially if you're at the same level. So that's where we're trying to kind of balance things a bit here, um, and leave room for people to make decisions that are right for them.
So what we're looking at then is sustainable allyship. How we
Sure.
can create sustainable allyship where we can speak up when the opportunity presents itself, but
Hmm.
there are reasons not to as well, and like it's okay to find that balance. And so I guess I wanted to ask about what sustainable allyship looks like in comparison to, for example, guilt driven allyship or even
Mm-hmm.
fear driven allyship too.
Mm. Oof. Yeah, so true. Yeah. I mean, the fear is not sustainable. That's at the end of this. I mean, at least in my experience, I've done fear based things and I burn out so quick. It just,
Yeah, for sure.
I get so tired and I'm like, always in my head about it.
Mm-hmm.
But as soon as I'm like, okay, sometimes yes, sometimes no, let's like be present enough in the moment to be able to discern that. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
not going to always discern correctly either.
Right.
And also not to beat myself up about that. It's like I learned from a lack of discernment moments. Um,
Right.
and so it's just like, yeah, not kind of letting fear run the ship, even if
Mm-hmm.
maybe for some moments it does, also okay.
Mm-hmm.
But just noticing that and being able to get back into a mode of like, I will figure this out. I'll connect with others to further understand and deepen my understanding or my
Mm-hmm.
approach to things. And so, yeah, I think there's the difference is between fear-based and sustainable allyship when it comes to speaking up is specifically related to energy levels. Like, what are
Mm-hmm.
you able to maintain um, for the long term? Because especially with trans issues, we need to maintain energy. There's a lot to do, so
There's a
that's
long
an
journey
important.
ahead.
Hmm.
So I guess to close up then, I want to ask what you would want allies to take from this conversation with regards to that.
You're a good person. Everybody who's listening to this is a good person. Just start from there and then keep trying.
Mm.
Actually commit, because some of the allyship journeys that I've been on, I've committed to continuously trying and
Mm-hmm.
learning from it too, right? Not doing the same thing over and over, but there's just so much richness that comes from actually engaging and going deeper.
Mm-hmm.
And there's surprising, pleasant things that happen along the way when we actually, commit to doing the thing.
Mm-hmm.
So
For
yeah,
sure.
I would just invite folks to, or hopefully inspire folks to kind of lean into that and make best efforts. And of course, there are people that can support you along the way too. It's not like a solo endeavor. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and also, as part of that, to think about your behavior rather than who you are as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
I kind of jokingly said everybody's a good person, but I think there's something to be said about kind of parking that as a consideration and being like, I'm just going to focus on my behavior and adjust that accordingly and not have it
Right.
be such a heavy thing to be about my
Right.
personhood. Yeah.
For sure. Um, we do have a resource, the Allyship 101, and I was wondering if you could explain a little bit about that, and we'll link it in the show notes as well.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So this is something, especially if people are new to allyship of trans and non-binary folks, and just wanting to know kind of the nuts and bolts, the lay of the land. We've got tips and things that you can do to better show up, whether it's respecting pronouns and names, or even being able to learn further in different ways, so that you feel more confident, more equipped to show up in these types of conversations. So yeah, feel free to check it out.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Kai. And we'll see you next week.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Bye for now.
Bye.